civiltà dell'amore. Fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Bene, buon pomeriggio a tutti.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this conference. Today with us we have two very different people with us today who work in the same sector. A university professor, Professor Cesare Maria Cornaggia, who I thank and welcome. And a guest from far away, from Benin, Grégoire Ahongbonon, the founder, and then, as you'll see later, he doesn't say he's the founder of anything, but he's rather the organizer of the San Camillo de Lellis Association in Benin. So, as I said earlier, two people who work on different wavelengths with different people, but both still looking after people who come to them to try and overcome very difficult, painful moments, very troubling, trying times, people who suffer and who live an experience that's very difficult, that they need help to overcome, and that's difficult because it makes living difficult, a problem of mental health, of mental issues, a problem which we face every day, and which we face in a different way, in different settings. The professor has a lab, Grégoire is in his welcome centers in Africa, and maybe it's part of Grégoire's character that he never studied, he's not a doctor. He tells us how he used to fix tires. He was a mechanic, and at some point his life changed and he became aware that there were others in this world. And like I said earlier, if this is a conference about stories and about different stories, and both of these have had to face their fellow man and face the problem of pain through care. So let's start with the first question for Professor Cornaggia, and this conference is called "On the Side of Man: A Paternity That Cures," and it's a title that we took from a text Professor Cornaggia wrote, which says that on the side of hope, we draw from paternity a method of curing. So I wanted to ask Professor Cornaggia, what are we talking about when we're talking about paternity and care? So, first of all, thank you, Marco, and thank you everyone for coming. I'll try and answer this question as best I can, starting from the only thing I can really start from, which is my own personal history. For me, paternity was an integral part of who I am, and of what I consider to be myself, starting from the perception of the loving total gaze which I once encountered and which accompanied me. And I always say that it's followed me constantly, and it takes me it leads me to the discovery of both myself and of reality, the reality that surrounds me. Especially in my work life and my training, I had a way of living a kind of definite paternity with Professor Italo Carlo, at that time was my teacher. And for me that experience was one that was one of feeling fundamentally seen and appreciated in everything I did. I'd use the word recognized, that is, seen for how I was at that time, both in my good side and my bad side that I still do have. I was seen for who I am. And this experience of being seen in this way, which come to mind, after the encounter with Cardinal Federico, I recognize myself now. That's the moment when seeing this other person helped me recognize myself. That is the experience of touching, of accepting, of seeing all these parts, even the dark, nasty ones that I didn't want to see. I was in Milan. We say I was an annoying guy. I was a bit out of control. I tried not to see, but instead that external gaze that took all of this as part of who I am allowed me to see myself, to not be ashamed of who I am, to welcome to accept myself, to accept that these could be integral parts of me, but that I could change, that I could do something to change myself and better myself as a human, that this change might have been, even more convenient for me, or made me a bit more interesting. It would have made me and transformed my life into something better than what it was. So that's what, for me, the experience of paternity was. It made me realize that my life could have been happier, that I could have been a little bit better than what I was. Not masses, but a little bit at that time. That I could have moved in a certain direction, and that I'd been taken by hand, and I could be led towards a new, better direction. This experience of paternity, and I jotted down a few notes. When I was doing that, I realized that paternity, we always put it next to the word experience, because I wouldn't know how else to describe it. So I see paternity as an experience. It's an experience that isn't locked in the past. It happens today, it happens now, and continuously in the present. And this allows me every day to continue living and to be thankful of being not only myself, but also to be faced with reality and to live that without fear, without prejudice. When it happened to me to live all this in my kind of wider work context, I remember that it was after I'd graduated. I was already a psychologist, but a psychiatrist. But I wasn't able to do anything else than just understand how this, just like how the first step of every cure, and that's how we'll kind of reach the junction between paternity and cure, it couldn't be anything else other than the culmination of the recognition of the one who was in front of me in his totality, just like how I had been acknowledged, the good and the bad, all mixed together. Even the worst parts of me, I was accepted as a whole for who I am. And this was how, in the same way, I felt recognized, and this recognition brought with it the completion of the recognizing the totality of another, without trying to change someone. You know, with how much medicine, how much psychiatry. You know, I don't know how much you have in Africa, but in Europe, there's always there. It's always there. There's always medicine. Before we understand or accept things, we have to change it, get rid of it, take medicine. No, we don't need. What we need is to be understood, to be taken in. And there's a bit of maternity sprinkled in here as well, because maternity is the introduction to paternity. It comes beforehand, and so there's a need for acceptance, which is part of the process of looking after someone. So everything which permitted me to look onto certain people's fragile areas, what people are afraid of, what make him feel sick, so that he could accept deeply. And acceptance is part of a cure, because you enter into care fundamentally when you accept that there are parts of yourself that you don't want to see, that inhibit you from living fully, living happily. And so these parts, we need to accept them first ourselves. We need to look at ourselves properly and accept that they are part of who we are. And so therefore others can look onto them as well and want to cure them. This is exactly what had happened to me. That by meeting the one who'd been my teacher, my paternal figure, he had permitted me to be curious, even of the parts of myself I found shameful. So living paternity today leads to a second thing, which I think is important, that there's always something positive. There's always something positive that other people bring. And that this other is usually not aware of this. He's afraid of it. He's afraid to recognize his own positive aspects, while he has an enormous need to be able to perceive himself as a positive influence. But no one has ever taught him how. At least that's what we see in the majority of cases of why when people struggle to see good in themselves. No one ever taught them how. And he doesn't see them not because he doesn't want to, but because he was never taught how to. And this other person, therefore, is amazed by the fact that we see a positive in them. And that this amazement is for two reasons that are absolutely tied to paternity. That is, that this comes not because we say that there's a positive. We're not because we invent it. It's that we have lived, first of all, within ourselves, and within that paternity we were talking about, we lived an experience of seeing the good. We actually lived it ourselves. The second reason, he's amazed because this positivity isn't something that's said, it's something that resounds within each of us, and therefore is reflected in each other. And this is what comes about through this kind of reciprocal awareness, because awareness has two directions, the other towards me and vice versa. And when we experiment this encounter and it's taken up, we see our fragility. This shows both sides of the relationship, the therapist and the patient, within a kind of competence. I bring bringing together. Our fragilities are the same, our questions are the same, and with this we come to follow, to relive our own darkest days, to identify our own questions, those which bring us much anxiety, our own weaknesses, and from here we begin to to allow us to name our own desires, these own things that often are hidden to us, and the roads are often dark and narrow and dangerous, but they can be found on the way, on the journey to self-discovery. This doesn't mean that the therapist or we have to narrate our lives to our patients. We don't have to tell him too much. If my patient could diagnose me, then I'd be much better at my job. But the patient sees clearly how his own position is often evocative of our own history, our own questions, which are often the same and which are alive within him as well. In this way, and this is the final point, I hope I was in time. And that's not a great answer, tell me just to carry on, but oh well. In this way, starting from this paternity in the present, the encounter with another is open to this relationship which doesn't really belong to either of us. When we enter into dialogue, in discussion, when a relationship isn't ours, it's not mine, it's not yours. When I enter into a relationship, which I call this kind of third point, it becomes a third rationality that allows me, through a reciprocal awareness and the subsequent discovery of the unknown parts of ourselves, it's a whole new narrative experience. We emerge from this discussion different than how we went in. I remember a patient who once, when we were at the point in which he was leaving, he said, "Listen, I've been coming here for a few years, and thank you. I feel like I've changed, but before I go, I want you to answer me one thing. If I've changed, and I think that's true, but I want to ask you this just to understand if it's true. Have you changed in your what's changed in your relationship with me?" This is an amazing question. I didn't reply immediately because I wouldn't have known what to tell him. I said, "Look, I'll tell you next session." But he really struck me because he catalyzed within me the need to understand how my relationship with this man had changed. Because, as Hölderlin affirmed, man is a relationship. We are a relationship. And it's through said relationship that change can come about. That change which paternity makes you want to do. And that this relationship allows you, bit by bit, to do. And it's here in my own story that I've understood that the journey towards paternity is what can cure. Thank you.
The Pope, in the message to the meeting, said, "The fragility of the times in which we live is to believe that there is no possibility of being saved. Someone that can help you, that can embrace you, and that forgives you, and that helps you up. To not believe that this is possible. So therefore, what is to be cured? What is the experience of being cured?" Thank you. Well, this is really true, I think, and I think it's in line with what I was saying myself, that possibility of a change that starts, first of all, from the discovery of what I need to change and within myself. So I feel I would answer in the following way, that curing is a relationship that creates a change from that starting point that you said. And as Wittgenstein said, man cannot help but communicate. But this can sometimes encounter challenges along the way. The person in front of us, the patient, or even myself, before I encountered my mentor, this communication is not able to reach its fulfillment, at least not through words. Or it communicates things that are sometimes incomprehensible to us. Maybe because it isn't fully self-aware, or because it doesn't allow the other become a participant through our communication, through the use of words. And when words evade us in order to communicate with each other, but we own those words, this structural and ontological need to communicate, when it doesn't happen through words, it happens through other means. And in this sense, I mean symptoms. What makes us draw closer to each other. In other words, discomfort. If I'm not able to communicate with other people, I communicate this lack of communication through discomfort, through unease, through a sense of discomfort. So, therefore, the first step in a cure is to have within us the awareness of the person that we have in front of us with their symptoms, with their discomfort, with their uneasiness, with their confusion and their not knowing what to do. They tell us, but the most important thing is the symptom. This is the most important thing that tells us about them. And it's so important that we should be grateful for that symptom, because it tells us how we can speak to them. It opens a door to them. And through which perhaps initially we are not able to read. And we'd prefer, if they didn't have that symptom, we'd like to eliminate it. Patients come to us and say, I have this symptom, please get rid of it. And then we find out actually that's not the case. I have this symptom. Please help me understand it and look at it with me. This is the real question. The symptom is the greatest gift that the patient gives to us. It is a communication, it's a means of communication which is full of meaning that we need to slowly try to understand. Think about all the medicine, all the psychiatrists. You have a symptom, okay, let's get rid of it. That's it. Solution, problem solved. But let's not, of course, this is not an apology for symptoms, but we need to understand that which the patient brings is that which the patient is able to bring us. And it is needed, we need to understand what it is and what significance it has. So this is the first step. The second step is to eliminate all the barriers that we have in communicating with the patient, and to try and translate what we want to say to them in the most clear and effective way. Something that begins from that awareness that we were talking about before. The possibility, the desire to change, to shift. This step is the reciprocal recognition, where man is able to start constructing a new narrative about his story and create new meanings, a new hermeneutic of his story. The greatest meaning of the symptoms sometimes does not emerge. It's hidden, it's veiled. We have to open, however, to this meaning. In fact, Hermes was the messenger of the gods who opened up the communication between gods, and very often their messages were not that clear. So symptoms are like an act of communication. In this third step, both therapist and patient are able to work through to find a solution through dialogue. We have two othernesses, we could say: our interior world, and we need to communicate. They need to communicate this interior world, their feelings, their emotions, their fears, all that inhabits their internal world. They need to start opening up the communication of their otherness, and this happens through the relationship with us, just like it happened through the communication of my mentor. So the person that we have in front of us is someone with which to open up a dialogue that opens up towards the interior space and external space. That recognition, which we spoke about before, we need to get to the point of creating a new narrative of the self and new meanings. All of this brings to a process which must happen through the acceptance of oneself. And this is the possibility that also a part of myself may be changed. The acceptance of the other brings me to help me to change a part of me. Sometimes it is very difficult to change ourselves, but we need to change setting. So we need to get to the end. Okay. Because the time must be respected, of course. But I could also conclude right here, because it's a point that we can end on here. All of this it was important to say all of this. Which concludes and summarizes what I wanted to say. I think that this process, and I'll just end on one statement, this process goes across the journey that was the same as my journey. I'd just like to end on this. We need to go from a position of living things to be able to be worthy of love, to the position of doing things, of putting myself in the world precisely because I am loved. So I thank Professor Cornaggia. Now we'll change setting. We won't change the words, but we will look at a video to introduce the next figure. Who did this to me? I'm hurt. It hurts. In many parts of Africa, thousands of people lived chained up and forgotten. They are mentally ill. They have committed no crimes. They are victims of fear, ignorance, and poverty. Grégoire dedicated his life to redeem these people. Where is the key to this padlock? Through the Saint Camille de Lellis Association. 70,000 people have already been saved. Grégoire decided to build a new center. And he continues to fight. So that no one will be chained up any longer. Sorry for being a bit emotional, but what we just saw, I happen to go through them every year when I meet patients in Africa. And it's been 25 years of this experience of death and resurrection. But in the title of this meeting, there's the word paternity. And every time I see Grégoire, be it in Togo or on the Ivory Coast, I hear everybody calling him with the word father. And so he is called Father Grégoire by these people who live this terrible experience that you were able to witness. Papa Grégoire, to you the floor. Good evening, everybody. All that I can say this evening is all thanks to God. Our Lord, our omnipotent Lord, we should thank him for what he has done. He is the Father of all of us. And no one can be lost with God. I myself included. I too was like these patients. I have always said that God came to look for me while I was lost in a pothole. And he is stronger than me. And this is why I say that it is that the grace that God gives us, we must use it. What we are given, we must give it back to people, the people around us, because everything that I have done, I have done it because God did it towards me. And so everything that he has done towards me, I've done towards others. This is important. I was like these patients because I came from the Ivory Coast. I was just a simple tire dealer. I didn't study. And now I'm here with a professor who has studied many years. This is just God's doing. It is God who wanted me to do this. I got to the Ivory Coast. I was a tire shop dealer. I earned a lot of money. But in one moment, I lost everything, and I almost wanted to commit suicide. Yes, I wanted to commit suicide, even me. But thankfully, I met a missionary priest that was able to embrace me and was able to listen to me. These patients that are abandoned on the African streets, if they had met someone on their journey like I did, someone who had listened to them, maybe they would not have lived through the suffering they went through. I too could have been chained to a tree and abandoned on an African street. But I found someone who was able to listen to me, not only listen to me, but paid a ticket for me and allowed me to go to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage. And in his homilies, he said, every Christian must build a part of the church by putting a brick, by laying a brick of the great church. And I understood that the church is not a thing of priests, but it is something that has to do with every one of us. And I started to ask myself, what is the brick that I have to lay for the construction of this church? So when I went back to Africa, where I lived with my wife on the Ivory Coast, we started to lay this brick. And we created a small prayer group. And one day, with this prayer group, we went to the south of Bouaké to visit ill people. And during this visit, we saw ill people, women, men, and children who were completely abandoned. And the hospital, these people don't have enough money in order to cure them, and we don't have social welfare or a public health system in Africa. If you don't have any money, they don't cure you. And the firefighters, if they find you on the street, they might bring you to the hospital, but you might have no one to pay for your medicine, and you might end up just waiting out the rest of your days in hospital without being cured. Before we started praying, we must manifest our love, our friendship to them, we said. We have to start helping them. And we began to look for resources to try and cure them. And very quickly, many of these ill people began to be cured. And those at least that died, at least they died in dignity. And personally, I began to realize why I identified myself with the poor and the ill. And this is how we looked for Christ in the poor. And by doing this, we began to help people in prisons, and then children on the streets. And then in the 90s, I also had an encounter with a mentally ill person. I saw mentally ill people abandoned on the streets. I used to see them naked as well, and they try to look for food in the rubbish, in the trash. This is a problem that touches every country in Africa. I used to see them, but I wouldn't really look at them. As I said, in 1990, I would see them on the street, and once I saw one mentally ill person who was looking for something to eat from the trash, and that day, I don't know why, I stopped. And this time, I really started to look at him. And this is when I said to myself, this is Jesus. This is Jesus that I'm looking for in the church. He is Jesus. And then I said, they are actually, I am afraid of them in a certain sense, but also I shouldn't be afraid of them because they are telling me something. Then I started every evening to try and go and find them. And I tried to get to know them, and I started to discover that they are men, women, children that desire to be loved. Simply loved. I talked about it with my wife. We got a freezer, we put water inside, and every year, every day, every night, we would go and give them fresh water. And very quickly, we started to create a friendship with these ill people. And I started to ask myself, why? Why should I do this? Give them water, and if I go to my comfortable home in the evening. So we began to start collecting this group of mentally ill people within a parish. Many of them needed medicine, and we started to give it to them, and they began to get better. In 1993, then, the health authorities came, and I went as well. And when they saw me with the mentally ill people, they were very happy. And we asked the public health to give us a space within the hospital, and we took it, and we began to create the first center. And based on these results that we used to see, nuns and priests started to call us. And close to Palm Sunday, a woman came to visit me, and she said, "Come with me, because you need to come to my village." I went to her village. I went to see the leader of the village, and in the house, I saw someone who was completely paralyzed on the ground, practically. His body was completely chained and tied up to the ground, hands and feet. And we weren't able to take the ties off. We had to go away. We came back with the nun with some shears, and we were able to unchain this boy. And when we did that, we cleaned him. After having cleaned him, this boy looked at me and said, "I don't know how to say thank you. I don't know how to say thank you to God. I don't know how I was able to deserve this fortune to having encountered you." Unfortunately, he was so sick that in the end, he did not survive very long. I had never seen anybody so chained up. I had never seen anybody chained up in the forest, and what I saw that day really hurt me, and we decided to dedicate ourselves to this. when you come to our center, everybody says, Papa Grégoire, Papa, Papa. One of them once said, "You are more than a father for me." Yes, these ill people need to be loved. Man needs to be loved. We don't have to cure everybody, but we need to give a dignity, recognize the dignity of everybody. And I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody, all of those who since 1998 started to invite me here. I came in 1998 for the first time, and every time I leave the meeting, I always see the wonders of God. Everybody says, "You should stop. Why don't you? Aren't you sick of going there every year?" No, absolutely not. I'm not sick at all of this. Every time you receive something so great, you want to give it back. Today, we have created a community at the St. Camille who are trying to dedicate their lives to these ill people. This initiative continues, therefore, and I want to say to all of you that we are only present in 3 countries for the moment. There's no hospital in Chad at the moment. There's nothing there. Nothing at all, not even a hospital. A woman gave a terrain of 2 hectares and started to do something for ill people there. And there's someone who came to Benin as well. When she came, there was absolutely nothing. She began to start a small unit, a center of assistance, and there are many ill people that have been unchained in Chad and who now in turn have decided to help other mentally ill people. They need to be supported and helped. Mentally ill people and ill people need to be helped. They need our support. They organize themselves. They're very independent. Many new centers are happening. 300 are present at the moment. And they become then doctors, nurses themselves. And Benin became in 2019 and 2021 one of the most important centers because many of these got a joy for life back, many of these mentally ill people, and started to work in those organizations themselves because of this joy for life. This is our joy. And for this I say thank you for this conference and for everything that you all do, each one of you. In name of these mentally ill people, when you meet other ill people, say that you want to remove the chains of these ill people. There are 130,000 ill people, mentally ill people, and none of them, they have very few resources, but yes, we are able to bring back the joy into their life. If Christians don't do anything for these ill people, it will certainly not be our authorities who will do it in our place. Ill people want to live just like all of us. Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
So we still have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask Cesare, this meeting is titled The Passion for Man. What does this mean for you? because it's a phrase Giussani said here at the meeting in '85, saying that Christianity isn't the foundation of a religion, but it was born as a passion for man. What does that mean for you? You've got 3 minutes, eh? I will obey. I'll be as strict as possible. I just wanted to say, if I could first express my thanks to Grégoire, and I wanted to say that I was extremely struck when he said that he told us his experience at the beginning, because it reminds me of this experience of feeling seen, especially when he said, I found someone who listened to me. In a completely different context, you know, we probably live in two completely different worlds, but still we started when we found someone who listened to us. And this is an extremely beautiful message that comes from two totally different worlds. If I can, very briefly, because if not, you'll hit me. And we need to be careful here. Well, we're pretty comfortable here. We don't recognize that we need to realize that the chains aren't only in Africa. Here, we find innovative ways, different ways to chain the mentally ill in our country. In Europe, they still suffer. It's just maybe in a slightly different manner. You know, I didn't really answer your question, but there you go. I don't want to wait to... And the passion for man is basically what we heard Grégoire say. So, thank you, Cesare, for bringing this up again. The chains, the ones we saw, there's not only physical, but our social services put up with many different kinds of chains and of different levels of present dehumanizations that are ignored. Extremely painful things that are repressed and hidden away. And Grégoire, for our conclusion, let's say, for you, what does Giussani's phrase, the passion for man, mean? How do you live this? So, the true sense for me is to love your fellow man. God loved us so much to the point where he gave us his own son. And we saw how he came and how he lived. He was a poor man. He identified with the poor. And he took the side of the weakest. And those who wish to follow him need to accept this. People need to accept that they must give their lives to the poor. We can recenter ourselves thanks to the poor. Everything you do to your brothers, the poor in society, whatever you do to the poor, you do unto me. This is how we find salvation. The gospel we heard yesterday, he who is raised up shall be lowered, and he who is low shall be raised up. This reminds us of the importance of humility, the importance of love, the importance of looking after one another, of giving oneself to others. And that is why I want to thank you tonight, once again. Because I know that these images you see every year, I know that many of you are raised up and become a source of providence for these people. You become the providence that allows us to continue to break these chains in Africa. And this is why I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's true, I always say this. The day will come. The day will come. And he will say to all of us, "Come, you who are beloved by the Father, because I'm hungry. You gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was a stranger, and you accepted me. I was ill, in prison, abandoned on the streets, chained to a tree, and you came to help me. Look at this chain. Wherever I go, I show everyone this chain. The sick man who wears this chain, look, this is how it goes round his neck. He's chained up like this by the neck, naked, put in a cell, chained to the wall. And when he's outside, he's chained to a tree, and he's left like that for 7 years, simply to sit there and wait to die. But we've been called, we've been invited to the European Parliament in Brussels. I went there with this very chain. The short video I showed you, that I showed there in Brussels, was even worse than the one you saw. There were people who were crying, there were people who were weeping openly. But as soon as these politicians left the hall, they forgot about this video completely. I've brought this chain to the meeting before, and I know many of you have had a strong reaction to this. Many of you have gotten up and helped us. Many have even, some have even written a book about this. But there are still, at the end of the day, people who are very far from reality, who don't know it. And being here, I'd like all of you to try to do something, because there's still many, many ill people like this. First, I told you that Africa's a big continent. We're not only talking about Benin and the Ivory Coast or Togo. And I know that these people can be helped. Please help them to free themselves. Let no one leave here without reacting, without being struck. Before concluding, in this moment we are creating a center for those for drug addicts in Benin. We asked some of our Spanish friends to help us. They've done all they can. But one day they called me, and they'd found a big foundation. They called me and they said, "Grégoire, look, we found a foundation, and with this foundation we can give you all the money you need to build this center." They paid for my ticket, they made me go, and together we went to this foundation. We showed them a video, the CEO, the director, they were all there to see this video. And I was looking at the director, and she was crying as she watched this video. And I said to myself, well, surely here we're moving people's spirits. But when the video ended, the lady told me, "Look, sir, I'm crying because it pains me. It really pains me to see what I'm seeing, but my foundation cannot do anything because because you deal with mental health, and our foundation doesn't help mental health patients. I'd love to do something, but if you could change the project, and I don't know, if you could start curing AIDS patients, because those with mental health issues, that they cannot be helped. But anyway, thank you, all you good people, like Marco, like Cesare, like everyone here. And the road carries on, for all of you here. The Lord continues to find a way to help us, how he wants, where he wants. And for as long as we can carry on our work, I invite all of you to help us, because it's part of an image. It's been shown today that, with few resources, we're able to give back the dignity to so many patients. Thank you, and thank you for everything you do to help these people. Thank you. Thank you, Marco, and thank you, Professor.
Allora,
So I'll briefly conclude this conference on the passion for man. Today we've heard from two very passionate people with a true passion for man, for whom caring is kneeling before the other, is truly getting to understand the other. And this passion is a structure, is an outlook with which we can have. We can see people, anyone we bump into, all the pain we encounter, people who are there waiting to be heard, to be welcomed. And I think tonight we should be leaving, I'd like to say, more intelligent people more able to see their reality. And as you heard from two professionals in very different worlds, very different places, but people who act nonetheless by facing reality and facing what God generates in reality. Not only beautiful things, but also the person who faces our gaze, who takes our hand, and like the Pope called us to, there's a need to defeat this fear of asking. We need to defeat this and move on. Thank you and good night.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.